The format for this evening's debate is as follows. Each of our speakers will begin with an opening statement that will last 15 minutes from the lectern. Following, each gentleman will have 10 minutes to respond to each other, and then finally they'll have closing arguments of 5 minutes. After which we'll take questions from the audience from the 2 microphones in the front here, one for questions directed towards Mr. Hitchens, and the other for questions directed towards Rabbi Wolpe. We ask that you please keep your comments concise and respectful so that we can proceed with as many questions as possible. At the end of the program, copies of both gentlemen's books will be on sale in the Union Lounge, and they'll be available to autograph them for you. So before we begin, I'd ask that you all please remain seated during the course of the debate, silence your cell phones, and offer Christopher Hitchens and Rabbi David Wolpe a warm welcome to Brockport. Begin, we're going to start with a coin flip to decide who goes first, just to ensure impartiality. Rabbi, would you like to call the flip? Heads. Oh! Here we go. Indeed it is the tails, and Mr. Hitchens will begin.
Thank you for that very handsome introduction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, for coming, for your courtesy and your curiosity on this, the greatest of all subjects. And thank you for giving me a reminder of the weather of the country of my birth. The hospitality of Rochester is rightly renowned. Well, it's an unusual evening for both of us in that the motion before us isn't a for or against debate question. It's a reflection on the importance of a very well-known subject. And I'll begin by saying why the concept of a deity is important to me, and why I think it's so important to show that this entity is man-made, and it shows. We are members, as we all now know, of a primate species, 1/2 chromosome away from chimpanzees. That also shows. One of the advantages we have over the other higher primates is we have a slightly larger prefrontal lobe. Our adrenaline gland, in my view, is still too big. Our reproductive arrangements were designed by a committee. We have appendixes that we don't need. We grow hair in the womb that we shed before we're born. We're adapted to an environment, the African savanna, that we long ago very wisely abandoned. Otherwise we would, along with 99.9% of all other species that have ever been on the planet, have become extinct. Some design, by the way, some creator that arranges such grotesque mass destructions and eliminations, but I may be getting ahead of myself. With these faculties anyway, such as they are, one of our great attainments is that we are pattern seekers. We look for coincidences, for patterns, for explanations. And there's a lot around us that needs to be explained. And the great advantage of religion, I'll just call it religion for now, I'm going to separate the word God in a moment, is that it was, and for many of us still is, our first explanation for everything. Religion was humankind's first essay into cosmology. Why do the stars shine? Why did they move? Why do they sometimes disappear? It's our first attempt at philosophy, the idea of reasoning about what justice might be, how we are to live together, and how we are to discuss. In some ways, it's our first attempt at literature, which is my own special subject. If I have one, it's our first real attempt at producing text that, though it is claimed to be revealed and sometimes claimed to be unalterable and divine, is nonetheless the work of man and has undergone, perforce, a great number of revisions, often at great cost. That's an attempt there too. It's an attempt at healthcare. For a very long time, people had probably a stronger chance of recovery if they went to the meeting conducted by the witch doctor, everyone knows that morale is important in recovery. There's no question, my scientific colleagues, Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, conceded with grace that it probably had a marginal but crucial effect on recovery, on health. It was our first attempt at understanding the natural order. Why are there earthquakes? Where do the comets come from? Where do the meteorites come from? Why are there tidal waves? Why are there plagues and diseases? In every case, you'll notice, though, that the answers proposed for these things by religion was wrong. In other words, the price of being the first explanation we came up with was it was also the worst. You'll do a lot better, ladies and gentlemen, with a germ theory of disease than you will if you're faced with a plague and you think it's the Jews again, poisoning the wells, or it's a punishment for homosexuality. Earthquakes actually were believed by many people to be a punishment for homosexuality, though the only one that's yet occurred in San Francisco was long before it ceased to be a heterosexual town. Now, with this enormous advantage, religion has a second order one that I think is much less creditable, shall I put it like this. Now, in the light of later discoveries, we now know a great deal about our own nature. We've analyzed the string of our DNA. We know what we have in common with other creatures, and indeed with other less animate objects too. We know we're made of the same material as other animals and worms and even plants. We have a very much improved idea of the origins of the cosmos, vulgarly called a Big Bang, but everyone understanding that there was a moment of explosion that is still going on. The universe is still exploding apart at actually a very rapid and, oddly enough, increasing rate. You would have expected it to decrease by now. But it isn't doing that. And so it's become possible more recently for those who believe in a religious interpretation of the world to say, we used to oppose that. We used to say it was profane to study evolution. We used to say God put the fossils in the rocks just to test our faith. That was one ingenious attempt to counter Darwinism, for example. But now we find evolution is so beautiful and so complex and so magnificent that obviously, we should have said this earlier, but we can say it now, God is responsible for that too. Same with the extraordinary effusions of physics and cosmology. Well, only a really big brain could have caused something like this to happen. You'll see my difficulty with this, which I hope you'll share. An argument like that is by definition unfalsifiable. There's no way I can prove that that's not the case. But I was brought up to believe, as I hope you are being also educated to know, that unfalsifiability, as Karl Popper explained it, is the test not of the strength of the theory, but of its weakness. If it can't be rebutted, then it means that it's an assertion that has very little value. It either explains everything or nothing, very much more likely to explain the second. William Ewart Gladstone, great British Liberal Prime Minister and Christian theologian, spent a great deal of his life trying to show that the wonderful speculations on morality and ethics and society of the philosophers of 5th century Athens were just, they didn't know this, but they were preparing the way for the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth. They were just prefigurations of the greater wisdom that was to come. He had to argue this. He laid his life on it, because if it were otherwise, it wouldn't be true that without divine revelation, we wouldn't have morals. Here I'm getting a bit nearer to the center of this argument. There are those who say, and I believe they attack us in our very deepest integrity, in our very core, who say that we wouldn't know the difference, wouldn't be able to know the difference, wouldn't be equipped to understand the difference between a right and a wrong action if there wasn't a supernatural warrant for this, if it hadn't been revealed to us in one or other set of books, that such is the case. Now, I believe this argument to be self-evidently false. I don't have the time to demonstrate it in full. I'll take any challenge on it, but I do have a question that is my own challenge. You have to name for me an ethical action taken or a moral statement made by a person of faith that I could not make. I've now put this question to some senior rabbis, to a number of Christian priests and Muslim imams and others. And I've not so far been given an instance where that would be defensible, where they could say, here's a moral thing we know about that you don't. Here's an ethical action we can perform, an unbeliever cannot. I leave the question with you. I'm always open to an answer to this challenge.